Mobile hunters, are you looking to make the move to saddle hunting this year? Or maybe you just want to add a few new pieces of gear or upgrade your current saddle gear? If that's the case, then head over to tetherednation.com where they've got all mobile hunters covered. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old timer, Tethered is your one-stop saddle shop. From saddles to ropes, sticks, ascenders, whatever it is you need, they have you covered. I've personally been using their gear for the past 3 seasons now. My base setup consists of the Phantom saddle and the Predator platform. And if you're wondering why I've chosen to use their gear above all else, here's the cliff notes. They're innovative and pushing the mobile hunting forward overall. They cut no corners and prioritize the safety and performance of their gear. They care about the community that they've created, and their gear allows me to hunt free. And above all else, I like to support good people doing good work. If you're interested in upping your mobile hunting game, then head to tetherednation.com. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker, they're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode 218. Today I'm joined by Christian Williams of Archery Strong. We are talking about archery injuries, how to come back from them, and how to prevent them. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine on this. That was like a feeling fine, kind of like Sylvester the Cat, if for those of you that are Looney Tunes fans. But it's been a little bit of Looney Tune around here with the amount of snow we have. I mean, I can't remember the last time I had this much snow. Last year, I don't think we really got any at all. And I'm going to be honest, it's really putting a damper on my scouting plans, which is kind of a bummer. I feel like I'm already behind in the off season, just started. It was really the thing I was looking forward to keep me sane while I wasn't able to shoot a bow. Cause that's what I often do in the winter is I have a little inside archery range that I have in my basement, and I'll use the winter to kind of, not so much worry about arrow placement per se, and more just kind of focus on, maybe breaking some bad habits that I picked up over the course of the season and stuff like that. I shoot a fair amount, but, I don't shoot maybe with the same type of intent during the season as I do in the off season. I guess the off season is really where I work on things, whether it's, getting a good break on my release. Sometimes, like this time of year, I'm really just kind of focusing on getting a good break and not focusing so much on where my pin is landing or where my arrow is landing. And then as the season kind of draws closer, it's like I start focusing in on that more so. Of course, tuning the bow, kind of making sure it's all ship shape and all that good stuff. But the reason I'm not able to do that this year is, like, you've probably heard me talk about it, and hopefully this will be the last time I have to talk about it. But I had an injury this year and been kind of working through that. And I've mentioned in the past, my buddy Greg Litzinger had an injury in the past too, that he's been kind of working through similarly, both kind of shoulder ailments. And it just so happened we were talking the one day, and there was a fellow that he turned me on to, Christian Williams from Archery Strong, who really kind of takes a look at archery, shooting archery, and the mechanics of it in relationship to kind of like the biomechanics of the body and how it wants to work, how it should work, and how it's going to work, I guess, maybe best for you, or, a very personalized kind of specific way. Everybody's body is built differently, so not any one technique is appropriate for every individual person. And so we talk a little bit about that, but, I've been kind of struggling with this whole deal, and I figured, it might be good to have someone come on that, works in this area specifically, because I'm probably not the only one out there listening, or in the world who is dealing with some type of shoulder pain, shoulder issue that either is related to archery, or maybe injured it a different way or whatever the case is, but it's impacting your ability to shoot. And that's kind of where I'm at now, is that, like I was saying, scouting kind of takes my mind off of that, and I'm able to kind of go out and do some things I want to do hunting related. When the weather's really bad like this, the only thing I have to do oftentimes is shoot in my basement, and I'm really not even able to do that at this point. I did shoot a couple arrows yesterday. I think 6 arrows, and there was still some pain involved. So that's the first time I've probably picked up my bow in probably 6 weeks. It was better than it had been. So I think I'm making progress, but still not where I need to be or where I would like to be. So with that, that's what we're covering here with Christian. He's the owner of Archery Strong. He talks a little bit about his background, but he has a background in this. This is what he went to, what he went to school for. And has a really deep understanding, not just from like the science part of it, from what he went to school for, but being a lifelong archery hunter, and training folks in a bunch of different ways, whether it's Olympic style lifting and stuff like that. So his understanding of how the body works and how to get it to do what it needs to do and how it's going to function best is very valid. And I've found to be very helpful. So I hope that you guys find it helpful too. If any of you are going through any type of injury that you're rehabbing from. And we also talk a little bit about preventative, right? So let's avoid being injured so we don't have to work through the rehab portion of it. So he talks a little bit about that and some things you can do to, prevent shoulder injury. We really kind of focus on the shoulders, as those are probably, the most critical to an archery hunter or a competitive archer. And so those are kind of the areas that we most focus on. So with that, we'll go ahead and just jump into today's podcast. As always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have on, this might be new for the guests that we have on, but for anyone who's been listening to this podcast since about, endish of November, you've probably heard me belly aching and whining, and I will admit to some whining. I'm not too manly to not to admit to that. A little bit of complaining about some shoulder pain that I've had and sustaining an injury. And if you listen to the Hunt for Real podcast that I recently did with Tony Peterson, we kind of talked about how I got that. I fell out of a tree as I was climbing and so forth. And I've done a ton of different things to try to remedy it. And it just so happens, my buddy Greg Litzinger had an injury last year that he went through. And he was just texting me earlier this week and was asking me how I was feeling. And I said I was still trying to kind of dealing with it. And he just so happened to be, I think, messaging with the gentleman that I have on the line today about the same exact kind of issue. That is because I'm talking to Christian Williams, who is the person who heads up, leads, and is the spearhead of Archery Strong, who kind of deals with helping folks either get back on the mend, preventing injuries, and overall becoming a better archer. So with that, Christian, how you doing, my friend?
Yeah, Clint, I'm good, man. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So was that did I do you justice there, man? Did I explain kind of what you do to a degree in a nutshell? It was probably the most layman's way you've probably ever had described what you actually do, because it's much more sophisticated than the way I explained it.
Yeah, that's totally okay. That's straight to the point. It's straightforward, and you nailed it. As far as my goal and my purpose with Archery Strong is it's to keep guys in the woods, prevent injuries, help resolve injuries and pain for those that have them, and approach archery so that can make sure more arrows hit their mark. So
right, awesome, man.
Absolutely.
Well, before we jump into all that, I always like to just kind of have a frame of reference so everyone knows who's on the other line with me. So if you wouldn't mind, just tell me a little bit about yourself, what you do for a living, and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Christian Williams. Again, I'm the owner of Archery Strong, and I am from Pennsylvania. Clinton, I know that you're a Pennsylvania guy too, which is cool.
Yes, sir.
I grew up my entire life in Western Pennsylvania, and just this past August, I married a special woman, and she drugged me out here to Central Pennsylvania. But no, she didn't drag me out here. We're excited to be out here. We are just a little bit south of Du Bois and Clearfield.
Okay.
For any of the other Pennsylvania folks. So I'm here. I'm new to Central Pennsylvania, and I've done a lot of different things up to this point in my life, and most of it has resolved around human performance, sports injury, and biomechanics. Everything from strength and conditioning coaching, Olympic weightlifting coaching, CrossFit coaching, getting a degree in exercise physiology. But my big job was, or I would say my main job that has led me to where I am today, it was a 4 or 5 years stint at a sports injury center, where my job essentially was to assess movement, look at movement patterns, look at how the individual's body functions, identify issues that are causing pain for that individual, and then correcting the issue or the injury for that individual through what's called corrective exercises. So, best way to describe it or put it is just the same way that a mechanic would figure out what's going wrong with your truck and then fix it. I would figure out what's going wrong with the performance of the movement of a person and then fix it through corrective exercise. So that was the big experience of my life that eventually led to Archery Strong, which is the same type of approach that I used to work with all kinds of different athletes and general population. But I've always had a love for archery, and I felt that there was a need for this. And a couple of years ago, I just started putting out information. And to be quite honest with you, Clint, I just at the time I thought that it kind of sounded like a cool idea, a fun idea. Thought, yeah, maybe I'll see what happens with it. And here I am. I guess 2.5, no, almost, yeah, just over 3 years ago. Here I am today, and I'm now doing it full time. Working with all kinds of archers, all kinds of people, everything from relieving pain to preventing injury to the performance side of archery as well. So
that's awesome, man.
It's been a fun journey.
That's awesome, man. I love hearing when people kind of turn a side hustle or a passion into, their day job, man. There's nothing better than being able to wake up every morning and do the things that you like to do. But how did you kind of get into that overall kind of, performance, training kind of aspect? Like, I know some folks get into those types of things because maybe when they were a kid, like, for example, really bad analogy, but my sister had braces and stuff growing up, right? And so she spent so much time at the orthodontist and with dentists, she actually went into dentistry, right? Or she went into that side of the profession, right? And so I'm just curious, was there an experience that you had at some point that kind of led you down that path, at least to start down that path?
Yeah, there was, and I'm laughing to myself because I love that you asked that question, because I was in between coaching some different weightlifting seminars one day this past summer, and I was sitting there and I was thinking that same thing. I was like, how the heck did I get here? I was just thinking, what was the first thing that kind of spurred this whole path to where I am now? And I whittled it down all the way back to, I believe it was 6th grade. And in 6th grade, we were still doing the physical fitness test in gym.
Yeah, I remember those. The presidential fitness test. Yeah,
exactly, as like a measure. And one of the tests was how many pull-ups. Boys were doing pull-ups, or chin-ups, rather, and girls were doing flex arm hang, where they were holding their chin over the bar.
Yeah.
And I remember that there was a girl that went before me, and her name was Nicole, and she lives pretty close to me. And Nicole went, and she ended up doing 8 chin-ups. And I remember getting up on that bar right after her, and I couldn't do a single chin-up. And I remember how terrible I felt. So immediately after having that awful experience of being embarrassed by Nicole, I remember asking my dad if he would buy me a pair of dumbbells. And I wanted to start working out, and it kind of fit too, because I was getting into football then as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to the local sporting goods store, and I remember the exact set of dumbbells that he bought me, exactly what they look like. And I started working out, and I just remember just being just amazed at what that could do to my body and how it made me feel. And I remember, I was just doing silly stuff at that point, curls and different things. But I remember going back later that year, and I was able to do a bunch of pull-ups. And I just remember how cool that was. And from there, actually, it wasn't too much longer after that I think I was about 13 or 14. My parents went through a rough divorce, and I remember I really used fitness and the gym as my escape. I would
Mm-hmm.
come home and I would eat, and I'd spend a couple hours in the basement lifting, or I'd go to my mom's apartment, and at her apartment complex, they had a little gym that I would escape to and lift for a while. And so I started doing that and just really enjoyed it. And then, oh, it was, I was in high school by that time after a few years. And I, trying to think of the timeline, I was kind of having trouble finding my niche. I didn't want to play baseball. I was done playing football. And I found CrossFit through a friend, and it was exactly what I was looking for.
Yep.
So I spent a handful of years in CrossFit, coaching CrossFit, competing in CrossFit, and really just was consumed with that. And that was an awesome experience. Eventually kind of fell out of that. Did some Olympic weightlifting and some different things. But around that time, I was searching for another avenue to really just put my focus into and be challenged by, and to, just good obstacles to overcome. And was in my late teens around that point, and that's when I really got into archery. I had a bow when I was a boy, and shot, like many people do throughout their childhood, but nothing serious. But
Right.
It was at that time when I was transitioning out of competing in weightlifting and CrossFit that I was really looking for something to dive into, and that's what led me to archery. And back to your original question, that's kind of what the path of training and human performance that led me to archery, and then ultimately to combine both this human component and then archery together too.
Right. So it sounds like it was like you recognize the adaptation aspect of things, right? That like when you apply the pressure, so to speak, right, the body changes, and it
Sure.
adheres to those pressures, or conforms or changes based on those pressures. And you were like, if you can do that for football or CrossFit or anything else, it would only make sense or stand to reason that you could kind of apply the same philosophical pressures, to a different sport, be it archery or whatever, and that the body will respond accordingly based on that, and you can increase your performance through those things.
Sure, absolutely.
Cool.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting, man, because just kind of hearing you go through your timeline and stuff like that. When we talk about adaptation, it's like people might be listening and going like, we're going to get to some archery stuff here. And so there'll be some, key takeaways for folks out there listening in terms of, some insights into injuries and so forth. But when you start talking about adaptation, like there's through lines there when you talk about like bow hunting in general, right? Cause like I think the name of the game overall when you're bow hunting is adaptation, right? Cause you lay a plan or you learn
100%.
through scouting or whatever the case is. And you have to then adapt. Your body's no different. It's constantly learning just like you are, and you're teaching it with all the different movements that you do, whether you're doing correct movements, incorrect movements, abusing your body, not abusing your body, taking care of your body, etc. Your body's reading that as they're reading puzzle pieces, just like you would a strategy to kill a big deer, and it's responding that way. So the inputs equal the outputs to a degree. Which for me, it's like I had that epiphany probably later in life than you did. It was more around wrestling because that was what I did growing up. And it was when I decided to get similar to you. It's like I got really serious about it because I was like, I need to enhance my cardiovascular capabilities, and I need to get stronger. And so I started just training like a madman, running before practice, wrestling, during our 2.5, 3 hour practice, whatever it was. And then I'd lift for like an hour and a half after practice. And like the way my body changed and my capabilities changed was like, it almost at that age, it almost happened overnight because your body's just so willing to, accept whatever.
So malleable. Yeah.
And it's crazy. And so I went from, maybe struggling in some matches to where it's like, I just started the telltale for me was I started beating kids who were clearly, because I started wrestling late in life, and I was beating kids who had been wrestling since they were in elementary school, who on paper were better than me and higher ranked than me. But if I could get them to the third, I knew if I could get them to the third period and I was close, I would beat them, because I would just continue applying the pressure, because I was so well kind of trained in terms of my, in terms of my wind. I just never got tired. You know what I mean? And so I was as good to go with a minute left in the third period as I was starting the match. It was no different, Yeah. And so, and that was kind of my strategy, was just like, keep it close to the end, and then I'll get them in the end because I'll just wear them out. And that was what I did. But anyway, getting back to archery and bow hunting, before we dive into some specific things around like training, prevention, and all those things, man, how was your season this year? Pretty good, or how'd you end up?
This season was hands down toughest season I've had yet. And I say that because, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago in our conversation, I got married in August, so that's when everything really changed. But for I think it was June 5th. June 5th this year is when, at least around me, everything opened back up. And for 2 months, I worked like a madman. Going up or leading up to our wedding, between coaching weightlifting and Archery Strong, just working a ton. So I didn't scout it all then. Got married, obviously spending time with my wife and focusing on my wife. Got married, moved to central-ish Pennsylvania in that beginning of August moment. We're spending time together. She's a teacher, so she was getting ready for the school year.
Yep.
I was still working on Archery Strong. Just so much going on. Point being is that I did not have any time whatsoever to scout at all around our new house. I don't think I set foot. I might have set foot. No, I didn't. I just drove through all the public lands around here, just marking access points. Right. That is the only thing I did before season started. So, no idea, where I'm going, what I'm doing. I had never truly hunted public land before being up here. Back home, I hunted entirely private. Had some really good spots there, and still do that. You learn over time as the seasons go, especially these smaller parcels in southwestern PA. 30 acres, 50 acres. You learn them pretty well. Right. And leaving that and coming to something totally new, which is this pretty vast public land. The game lands that I spent most of my time on was, I think, like 16,000 acres. And it was a challenge. It was extremely humbling. Very, very different from what I'm used to. I'm used to hunting a mixture of farms and kind of suburban areas, right? Housing developments and whatnot, which I really enjoy. And up here, it's a lot of hill country, a little bit of mountain, right? And it was tough. But I learned a lot. You nailed it there just a couple of minutes ago when you were talking. The two words that jumped out at me were growing and learning, and that's what this year was for. I learned a lot, had a lot of fun. I had a couple encounters with a few bucks. That was pretty cool. Nice. Was not able to kill a buck, but just about maybe 3/4 of a mile down the road from my new house here, I had been driving by a small 10-acre property, a little horse farm, and it just looks really good. It looked like it had a lot of pinch points, had a pine thicket on it. And one day I saw the guy out in his driveway working on an old truck. So I was like, what the hell? I'll stop by and shake his hand and ask him if I can hunt. And I've had a lot of practice with coming from Southwest PA and not much public and all private. I've had a lot of practice asking permission and talked to him for a few minutes. Just told him what my deal was. I just moved here. I'm looking for a place to hunt. I'm having trouble, getting on deer. I know you don't have a big piece, but would you mind if I hunted it? And he said, yeah, that's fine. You can try. He said, you can try, but it's pretty tough to get up in that pine thicket. Likely just blow them out. And I said, okay, well, yeah, thank you. Right. Look forward to be able to hunt. And I never set foot on the property. October 31st, Halloween. Went into that property with some sticks in the stands and had picked kind of a pinch point out based on what I saw on the map between a horse fence and a little farm pond where I thought I might get a shot. And I also, for some reason, I thought it might be fun to make it harder on myself this year. And that night I took my recurve, which was my first season with a recurve, and had a goal of killing a deer with that. And nice. Sure enough, it just all came together. It's picture perfect. The wind was great. Deer came out. It did exactly what I was hoping would do. big mature doe came right below me, and I was able to make a 7-yard shot with my first recurve deer, and that was by far the highlight of my season, and truly one of my favorite
Nice.
favorite kills that I've ever had. That was awesome. So
Heck yeah, man.
that was the highlight of the season. Besides that, I was able to kill a doe towards the beginning of the season back home on a
Right.
property. I'd taken a quick trip back home,
Nice.
and was able to get some meat that way. But humbling year, fun year, and looking forward to giving it hell next year too.
Heck yeah, man. That's awesome. A recurve kill. You can't beat that, man. And that's, that's like, I can totally, relate to that kind of move from hunting familiar territory and familiar ground to moving on to more vast, unbroken, non-farmland, right? Because you no longer have that natural structure that property lines create or farm habitat and stuff create. And so it becomes, a lot more paying attention to terrain features and, how habitat breaks, subtle habitat breaks within, or habitat diversity within those larger tracts of land and stuff like that. I do enjoy hunting big woods. I do spend my time, voluntarily actually in some big wood settings, which are really challenging to hunt.
God bless you.
Yeah. But it's the challenge, I think, that always brings me back to it. That, and in those areas, man, I'm telling you, I mean, I'm not telling you anything you probably don't already know, but you just spend yourself a little bit of time in there and you'll probably get on some of the biggest deer you've ever seen, would be my guess.
Right.
Because they're there, and especially in those, I know roughly, I have some family up in Du Bois. And so I kind of know the area somewhat, so to speak, just generally speaking. And I know there's some good deer in that area. Just a matter of finding them. But moving on, man, let's head into some specific, Archery Strong stuff, man. Cause I have, like I said, I kind of learned of you through Greg Litzinger, and he kind of turned me on to what you do. And him kind of knowing what I'm going through, he's like, "Hey, man, this would probably be a great guy for you to talk to and have on the podcast." And so it literally, he said that, and I literally in the next 30 seconds, I messaged you, and I was like, "You are correct." So the first thing I want to kind of ask, first and foremost, is, from your perspective, I want to just get a sense of what some of the most common injuries are that you're seeing in the archery space and what the causes of those are.
Yeah, sure. So, when I first started this, I thought the vast majority of issues that I was going to see would be draw shoulder issues, the shoulder that you draw your bow with. And I do see a lot of issues with the draw shoulder, but I would say that it's pretty equal between bow shoulder, the shoulder that is holding and supporting the bow, and draw shoulder. That's always something that people are curious about and often surprises people. It surprised me. And with that being, again, about 50-50, there's, like you said, a couple of big things that stand out or some of the most common things that I see. Right off the bat, I would say that one of the number one things that I see or issues that I see is a guy will come to me, or a girl, and they'll say, "Hey, I've been shooting for a long time. I've been shooting well. I haven't had any issues up to this point, but I started to have pain, or I started to have an issue a month ago or 2 months ago." And we dive in and we start talking about it. Okay, trying to figure out, what was the change, what happened, this and that. And long story short, one of the biggest things that I see is people will, for a variety of reasons, particularly with the draw shoulder and drawing a bow, they will force themselves into a draw style or a movement pattern, as I'll call it, that doesn't work for their shoulder. And what I mean by that is, I think I had two new archers this week, just alone. That was the issue, where someone will come across, an archer will come across something on the internet, or they'll come across video, or someone will give them some advice. And the advice will be something along the lines of, you have to draw like X, or you have to draw like Y.
Right.
And a lot of times that information has good intention, right?
Mm-hmm.
Either based on the person's experience, they're saying you should draw this way, or based on some thought, the individual say you need to draw this way. But what ends up happening is that the wrong person will get a hold of that, and they'll say, hey, this sounds good. And they'll force themselves into that draw style where, the video said you have to draw with your arm up over your head or a really high elbow, or you have to draw with your arm flat and parallel to the ground coming across your face. So they'll hear these things, they'll say, okay, well, I guess I need to do that. And essentially, again, what happens is the archers now force themselves into a draw style or a movement pattern that doesn't work for their individual shoulder. It doesn't mean that draw style is wrong or bad. It just means it doesn't work for them. The comparison I make, a couple quick ones, because sometimes this can be a little abstract. But if you watch 10 major league pitchers, they're all going to look pretty similar as far as how they're throwing a ball. But if you're really to look at that and analyze, you'll see some differences in the angles that they're throwing with, in some of the positions they're in, because each of their shoulder is a little bit different. Or another example is if you walk into a gym and you see 5 people lined up at a squat rack, all 5 of them are going to be doing a squat, and they look similar, but they're going to be different as far as how deep some of them are going, how much torso lean forward some of them have, how much the shins are going to angle forward. And all of these things are just referring to the idea that everybody has a similar body, but not exactly the same. Right. And when you force, in our example, in archery, when you force a shoulder to work outside of what its flexibility allows, what its stability allows, what the structure actually inside how that shoulder was created, when you force it outside of that, then that's where you can start to really develop some irritations, some compensations, and some issues in that shoulder. So,
right.
Answer your question, forcing yourself into a draw style or draw position that doesn't feel good for the archer's shoulder is one of the biggest things I see, and one of the biggest causes of pain. And to finish up that thought, I normally guide people along the lines of, does it feel comfortable? Does it feel smooth? Is it pain-free? And does it feel strong? And if you've got those 4 things, then you're probably on a pretty good path.
Right. That's interesting. That's interesting, man, because no, I was just going to say that's interesting because, when for me at least, I've done a lot of, work with Greg, and I'll just kind of reference Greg because Greg's shot competitively and stuff like that. And he's kind of the guy I go to, if I feel like I'm having form issues or whatever, I kind of say, hey man, I'm going to shoot a couple arrows, watch me shoot and tell me if you see any hitches in my giddy up, you know what I mean? Just to kind of, and I usually do that every off season. Like I'll spend he and I'll spend an afternoon shooting together, and I'm just having him kind of watch me shoot, find where I might have some inconsistencies where I can just tighten things up to be more accurate, you know what I mean? And more consistent in my, draw cycle and my release, everything. And and there's and like, to his credit, he's never once told me like, hey, draw like this. You know what I mean? Like he's giving me some pointers to help me smooth out my draw. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But he's never said, hey, draw like this. And I'm, just like anyone else out there who's, into archery, it's like I've for sure watched videos, whether it was John Dudley or whether it was, Chris Be Real or whomever, you know what I mean? Like Chris's videos or whatever, and just watch how they draw. And it's interesting that you say that because both shoot competitively, right? John, of course, was a big time archer, or just, Levi Morgan, for example, use another, big name that, wins a ton of prize money. They draw differently. Like I'm thinking back to watching the videos, and I'm like, they look differently. Yeah. They look differently when they draw. And I think people don't kind of take that in. Like I've never really thought about it until I had this injury and I started going to a chiropractor where he actually, my first session with him was not adjusting me. he made me go through a bunch of like different, like sitting, standing, walking, a bunch of different motions, and just watched my body, and
Sure.
he was basically just doing like, a kinetic kind of like visualization of how my body was moving and where I'm having hangups just based on how my muscles are working together, and
Right.
stuff like that, to kind of get a sense of like where I'm compensating, and
Yep.
that's when it dawned on me. And when, as you said that, I'm like, man, that makes perfect sense when you think about it, especially when you give the analogy of the pitchers, they all have different angles, or golfers with a golf swing. It's like,
There you go.
there's some principles that you follow to have an accurate swing.
Yeah.
Like there's some fundamentals of like, these are the things you want to do or accomplish, but how you get there is going to be in part based on what your body is going to allow you to do, which completely makes sense.
Yeah, very well said. Like you said, there are parameters, or sometimes I'll call them must-haves that we need to see in the draw. And outside of those must-haves, you are going to see variables. You are going to see exceptions to rules. And you picked out two archers there that you can easily watch on the internet, and they both draw differently, and they actually draw quite differently too. And again, we're going back to this idea where it's not that a draw style is wrong. It's just not that it's that a draw style is not right for everybody. So there's draw styles that are not correct for everybody, and there's draw styles that are not going to be wrong for everybody too. Right. And there's so many variables that go into this, and this is one thing that I go over with archers and clients when I get on an assessment with them. We'll talk through what they feel. I assess the shoulder to see what their range of motion is like, to see which positions feel comfortable, which ones feel strong versus weak, which ones are painful versus pain-free. Talking about the history of what they've done with that shoulder, how that shoulder's felt, just a lot of different things. But circling back to what you had asked, that idea of forcing or making a change into a draw style that doesn't work for somebody and then sticking with it is a big one. The other big one that I see is not so much related to mechanics or form or anything like that, but it is typically like a sudden onset of volume or intensity when shooting a bow. And what I mean by that, those are just fancy words. What I mean with that is it's the guy who hasn't shot their bow for a handful of months, and then they pick it up and they all of a sudden shoot 60 arrows one day, and just dive really, really hard back into it. Or they've been shooting a little bit on and off, but then they decide to just really ramp it up. And what ends up happening is we get a surplus or an overwhelming amount of stress in some of those tissues in the shoulder, or some of those muscles in the shoulder. And it essentially just develops into a more chronic, long-term irritation in some of those areas of the shoulder. So it's not necessarily that the archer is doing anything wrong from a movement or a technique standpoint. It's the simple fact of, hey, you got to ease into it, is the best way to put it. You've got to give, just like you were talking about earlier, and you defined some of that really well, but you've got to give a little bit of time to these structures and tissues and everything in your shoulder to adapt to the stress that you're placing on them. Adaptation does happen fairly quickly. Our bodies are very good at that, but it does still need time. And some of the more delicate structures don't keep up as quickly or keep up as well when you just dive back into something. So there's a lot of that I work through with people as far as adjusting volume and figuring out where they need to be right now, and then we can build them up as we equip their shoulders to handle the stress that they're seeing.
Right. It's interesting because people don't think about archery maybe in the same terms as they would, lifting or running or whatever, right? People are pretty conscious of, especially if you haven't run in a while, you're not going to just take off if you haven't run for 3 months and run 10 miles. You're probably going to start off with if you're in pretty good shape, you might start off with 2 miles. You know what I mean? If you're not in great shape to begin with, you might start off with a mile, right? And just kind of work your way up. same thing with archery. It's like if you're a person at the end of a season who just kind of puts the bow away and gets away from it for a few months, maybe you've got some family obligations or whatever, the weather's crummy where you're at,
Yeah.
you don't have an indoor place to shoot or whatever the case is, and you're just not shooting for months on end. It's unrealistic to expect your body just to perform like it did 3 months ago, whenever it was in peak shape
Sure.
for, pulling a bow back and, and getting reps in. But with that, like, so say, I'll just use me as an example, right? Because I've gone through this injury and we haven't got to my specific injury yet. But, I've really ratcheted back the shooting because I just didn't want to irritate my shoulder anymore. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
if I were to get back into wanting to shoot more consistently, because I'm a person who, up until this injury, it's like I shot out of season, like spring going through summer, probably 4 to 5 days a week. And then as the season hits,
sure.
I would shoot less because I was hunting versus shooting in my yard. So I'd maybe shoot 2 to 3 days a week during the season. So I'm a guy who likes to shoot a lot, but I literally haven't really shot at all since the end of November. So if I wanted to pick it up, say, March and start shooting again, consistently, what would your rep count be for me, and what would that look like in terms of, like, a responsible kind of buildup?
Sure. What is the poundage of your bow at?
65.
Okay, gotcha. So, me being me, I was joking with a new archer yesterday that I was working with, that I apologize to him because I said, thanks for your patience. I know I'm very, very thorough, but I like to be thorough. Before I would dive into giving you a rep count, I'd want to talk with you more and figure out what your shoulder's feeling like, what issues you've been having. You gave me a little bit of a preliminary glimpse as far as an accident you had, but just kind of glazing over things to make sure that you would be okay to jump back into shooting. And then we would essentially do, if we felt you could, a test to start out. But we do a test of just a half a dozen arrows, knowing that you recently had we'll call it an acute event, where you fall or you get in a car crash, something like that. But knowing that was the case, might just do a test and, hey, shoot half a dozen arrows. How does it feel during? How does it feel right after? And how does it feel the following day?
Right.
Get a report on that, and then from there we would build up a pretty conservative approach that would work for most people. If, let's say, they were off, they hadn't shot their bow for probably more than a month or two. I say start with 6 arrows. Start real modest, and increase by 3 arrows each day, taking a rest day every third day. So first day you pick it up. I shoot 6 arrows. Do I feel okay during, after, and then the next day? If I do, then add 3 arrows.
Right.
I shoot 9 arrows that day. Do I feel okay during, after, and the next day? Great. But hey, it's a third day, so we're going to rest.
Right.
Okay, the next day, shoot 12 arrows, assess how you feel.
Right.
The next day, shoot 15, see how you feel. The next day is a third day, so you'd rest. And then essentially you're just doing that for over the course of just a week or two, really. And as long as everything's going okay, get to the arrow volume that you're looking to shoot consistently. That might be anywhere from, might just be 20 arrows for some people. Other people might want to be up towards 40, 50, 60, obviously. Just depends on what the goal is, what the intention is there.
Right.
But that's just a general format or guideline. The overwhelming principle is a couple of key points. Number one, there's no such thing as starting too conservative, especially if you're not trying to get ready for, a rut hunt, or you're not trying to get ready for a big archery shoot, with thousands of dollars on the line. Then you can afford to start conservative and go slow. So start conservative with a small amount of arrows, and then just slowly build up and be disciplined to that. And I admittedly I'm one of the worst at that, because I love to shoot so much.
I know, right?
That I often shoot more than I probably should. But I love it, and I make sure I do what I need to do outside of archery as far as taking care of my shoulders to do that. But when we're talking about, the ultimate goal of what I do is to keep guys in the woods, keep guys bow hunting, throughout their lives, keep guys from having archery taken away from them. These are the types of things that make a difference.
Right.
So,
And that what you
that's the
mentioned there
goal.
was really kind of what's been driving me to kind of pay more attention to like massage therapy, chiropractic adjustments and stuff like that. Because, whenever he did the evaluation of my body and like how it moves, he asked me what my goals were. And my goal, what I said to him is that it's the same as why I work out, several days a week, is I want to continue to be able to hunt the way I like to hunt for as long as I can without compromise.
Right.
I was like, I know at some point age will require a compromise. I get that. Like it does to everybody. Right. I was like, but I want it to be age, compromising and not my physical capabilities, before it's time, so that's interesting. That's the way you phrase it. So I want to move to, we talked about that draw shoulder kind of issue. Let's talk about the bow shoulder, the riser shoulder. Like what are some causes you're seeing there for pain and some issues there?
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that. I did want to touch on that. So your original question, we were just on, you had asked what are some of the common things. The first one, just as a summary, the first one was forcing into that draw style. The second one was basically a vulnerable approach to either increasing arrow volume or getting back into shooting or shooting too much for what that individual can handle.
Yep.
And then the third one does have to deal more with the bow shoulder, but you could apply some of this to the draw shoulder. But we do see it a lot in the bow shoulder, and that is what I would categorize as voluntary or involuntary fault in the shoulder. And the reason why I put it like that is at the core level, we're talking about a fault, meaning a position or a mechanic in that shoulder that is vulnerable and compromising the integrity of the shoulder. So you're doing something wrong, is best simply put.
Right.
Now, with that, I have mentioned voluntary or involuntary. So voluntary is what most people are going to be more familiar with. It's the, hey, you are you're holding that shoulder in a position where that shoulder is too high, so we need to get it down. Or that shoulder's rolled forward, we need to drive it back. Or that shoulder blade's collapsing towards your spine, causing a weak joint, weak foundation. We need to get it more solid into the pressure of the bow. It's things that, to the naked eye that can be corrected, that can be changed through the archer's own voluntary effort. So sometimes that takes just a discussion and a little bit of practice and a little bit of awareness, and then some extra support from teaching the archer what to do as far as making those changes. Or we can have this other side, and that's where I called it an involuntary fault. And that essentially means that under the archer's own power, regardless of everything they can do, there are things happening within that joint or within that shoulder blade that are compromising the shoulder that the archer can't voluntarily change just by engaging something or moving or positioning something a different way.
Right.
It's that they either lack number one, the mobility in the shoulder to make the change, where they're just hitting a hard stop and their shoulder's getting forced into a bad position, and no matter how hard they try, they can't push through that resistance or that tightness. So you can have a lack of mobility. You can have a lack of we call it motor control, which just means that that person doesn't have, on a foundational level, doesn't have the control to move and position their shoulder the way they need to. Or third would be they just lack the strength to get in the position that is going to be uncompromised, going to be strong, and going to be technically sound. So it's a kind of an underlying issue where no matter how much someone is coached, no matter how much someone watches a video and tries to make the change, they don't have the physical capabilities, whether that be the mobility, strength, or motor control, to actually get to where they need to be. And that is where the archer is then really dependent on, hey, we need to strengthen the shoulder blade. We need to strengthen that rotator cuff. We need to stop that arm from just rotating forward and rolling forward into a bad position. We just got to get some of that muscle stronger. And it varies from person to person. Some people, they, for a lot of different reasons, can be just well set and well equipped um, for everything they need to do in archery, and they never have issues. And then there's other people who just weren't given as nice of a hand of cards, and
Right.
their bodies just don't naturally have some of those keys that you need on a foundational level. So sometimes we have to go in
And build
and
those up. Right.
really build those up and address those things. Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, it sounds very, I mean, if anyone out there listening, it's like, if you've, played sports or whatever, right. It's, you're usually trying to, work on whatever your weakness is from like a strength standpoint. You kind of identify what those are, and those become the things that that you work on. Or if you've ever had an injury to like a knee or whatever, right. It's like you then have to rebuild the knee, you know what I mean? If you're having
Right.
an issue or whatever, which are all kind of, again, I think people gloss over and overlook those things about archery until it becomes a problem, right? Because we don't think of them in the same kind of vein, even though, look, we're using our skeletal and muscular system, similarly, just applying it differently, so it has the same opportunities to break down and show weaknesses and vulnerabilities, just as a damaged knee would for a football player or whatever coming back from an injury. So so we talked about, what, some of those vulnerabilities are, and the three kind of top ones that you most often see. Let's talk a little bit about, preventative, right? Cause the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure or whatever, right? It's kind of like the old saying. And I think it might just be as you get older, like you start thinking of things in those terms, because, I'll be honest, man, I've had plenty of injuries in my life, through sports and stuff like that, some significant, some not so. And the recovery time was pretty quick, to be honest. This is really what I'll say is the first injury that I've had that, since I've gotten older, so shall we say, that is something I just didn't bounce back from in like a couple days, to where it's like it's stuck around and lingered. I did have a foot issue before I went to Montana that was more from overuse and running and training to go west to hunt. And that healed itself relatively quickly once I kind of, eased off of it and gave it some time. This is the first one though, where I've tried giving it time. I've gone and done, like I said, chiropractic adjustments. I've gone and, done some physical therapy type stuff, and it just isn't responding as quickly as I would like, or as quickly as it maybe has, other things have in the past. And so with that, I'm certainly thinking more and more now about preventative, right? Like, so what are the things I can do? Cause like I said, I work out, probably anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week, depending on my schedule and what I can get in, and so now it's like when I'm thinking about my workouts differently now, because before it was just how much could I rip through and be in as good a shape as I can be in. And it's more from a health perspective. Right. But now I'm starting to think about, about archery and the things that I like to do. So travel hunts, rugged country hunts, shoot my bow, and starting to think about, well, how do I adapt my workouts to not just be healthy, but also to fulfill those things that I want to be able to fulfill long-term with the hobbies and the things that I like to do. Right. And so a very long-winded way of saying, what are some things that archers should consider or be thinking about in the attempt to avoid injury?
Yeah, good question. It is a broad question, but I will cover as many components of that.
And we don't have to be completely comprehensive. I want to give people a taste and a flavor for, there's certainly things you can be doing to prevent some very common things. And I think that might be our best kind of approach.
Yeah, sure. So, let's see where I want to start. When we're considering workouts and what just kind of the average person is going to be doing or could be doing to make sure that it supports our archery and just overall function for life, because we're I think probably thinking about hunting on the grand scheme of things. That's the big motivator for the start of this little portion of the conversation, is that things have to be geared towards supporting hunting and in health and just overall function. So,
Right.
with that being said, if we're thinking about archery, we'll focus on that. One of the first things that I'm thinking about for the average person is seeing good variation in diversity in what that person is doing for the upper body. And one of the top examples is many guys will fall prey to doing a whole lot of different pressing work, everything from any sort of bench press or chest press or dip variations, shoulder press variations, that sort of stuff, which is all well and fine, but not balancing it with enough pulling work and shoulder blade work. So that is one of the big things right off the bat, is that there's got to be a good balance there, because what that can end up doing is so much of that front loaded type work, the pressing work, can in time put the shoulders into a position that's not going to encourage good function and healthy function for the long term. So we'll say balanced work overall for the upper body. One of the second things that comes to mind is prioritizing quality of movement and ensuring that that's not sacrificed for intensity and weight and volume or repetition.
Right.
Meaning that maintaining good positions in this, and I realize that this is very broad. I say good positions. Well, what is that? But maintaining good positions and good movement in all of your upper body and your lower body work. So part of that does require a little bit of learning about what's going to be good, what's going to be bad, but making sure that person is again putting at the top of their list, moving well with that movement versus just seeing how much weight and how many reps they can pump out. For example, you might take a pull up or some sort of cable row, for instance, right? You can just hammer those out and try to rip as much as you can, as many as you can, or you can still hit it hard, but make sure shoulder blades are squeezing down and back, making sure that you're minimizing lower back arch, making sure that it's a back dominant pull, again, with shoulder blades to lat, and getting good movement there would be a simple example. So we said an overall balance and variety and diversity of what that person's doing for the upper body, prioritizing good quality movement over intensity or reps or weight. Third thing would be making sure that that person is addressing or at least maintaining their range of motion. So some guys or girls are not tight. They're plenty flexible. So that person just should be using that range of motion in their shoulders. So doing full range of motion presses, doing overhead pulls, doing different exercises. I've got a lot of them on my page. That's going to be using the range of motion. If somebody is tight and they lack flexibility in range of motion, then there's somebody who is going to want to or need to make sure that that's part of something that they're looking at and part of what they're doing for their regular routine. And then I would say the last thing that would probably cap this off is making sure that they are still hitting what I like to call the nuts and bolts of the shoulders. And it goes back to, rotator cuff and shoulder blades and things like that. As far as it's easy to, go into a workout, go into a gym and bang out some push-ups, some pull-ups, and, great, we're on our way. And sometimes you can get away with that, and sometimes it doesn't cause an issue, and that's great. But for many people, at some point down the road, they've developed some of the obvious portions of their body, but have neglected some of the smaller things that are particularly important in archery, such as the rotator cuff, the muscles around the shoulder blades, the range of motion we just talked about earlier too. So it's getting a little bit more specific and not leaving those things out. And like I said, I try to put some good stuff out on my page, so there's some information there. We offer a whole bunch of different types of training too. So the goal is to make sure that these tools are available for those people that want them, because like I mentioned earlier in our talk, the goal for me is to make sure that people get to hunt as long as they want, people get to shoot a bow as much as they want, and don't have that taken away from them. And
Right.
I want to offer the tools and have the tools, which I do, and I try to make them as accessible as possible. And these types of conversations are awesome because it's just, if anything, just gets the ball rolling a little bit and just gets some people thinking about what they might be able to add in or do extra,
Right.
to make sure that they don't run into issues and that they can prevent the types of things you're talking about.
Right. And I think, to your point, the important piece is that it starts the ball and gets them thinking about these things, whether they currently have an injury and they've been kind of putting it off or not sure what to do, or someone who maybe is getting older and is like recognizing like, hey, there's some potential here for me to, to have a problem. So let's figure out how to not have one. Or the person maybe
Yeah.
who's working out going like, yeah, that would sound great. I should probably be, and what I'm hearing you, and this is a word that I like to use for this type of stuff, is be intentional in your workouts to
Yeah.
facilitate the things that you want to facilitate. Right. Cause I've been very
Sure.
guilty of what you kind of talked about, where a lot of pushing types of exercises. I do a lot of just like hit style, workouts, kettlebells, until
Sure.
my injury. That was a lot of the
Sure.
stuff I was doing. And I wasn't necessarily working on my back. So again, going back to whenever I had that kind of readout with my chiro, whenever he saw like my muscle structure and stuff like that, like he immediately was like, dude, he's like, he's like, I would imagine the pulling that you do for a workout is shooting your bow. He was like, because the
Sure.
right side of your back, he was like, is pretty defined. He was like, and
Yeah.
everything else is just completely pulling forward and is being pulled from the top of your left shoulder down across your back to your right horizontally.
Right.
He was like,
Right.
he's like, and that's what you got going on. You know what I mean? He's like, so it's pretty obvious what muscle groups you're working and which ones you're neglecting.
Sure.
Which is playing into, I think, the lingering effect of the injury that I currently have. But, two-part question. One, I just want to touch on really quickly, and then I want to dive into, so dealing with an injury. So first, how much do you kind of prescribe to like the aspect of, stretching? Because you mentioned mobility. So it's like, yoga and stretching and stuff like that. How much of that do you kind of look at and say, yeah, this has to be a part of it to maintain that mobility, or what's your approach, I guess, to mobility? And then I'll let you answer that first, and then I want to move into the injury aspect.
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's something that I like to try to provide more clarification on. I don't want to educate people because it sounds like I'm on a pedestal or something.
Right.
But this is important. The question you just asked, and you said, how much do you value or value stretching and push the mobility? And the reason why it's important to me is because the answer is not very much. And the reason for that is the shoulder is the most mobile joint in the body. It's more mobile than the hip, right? The shoulder is a ball and socket joint. And what that means is that we, by nature, were given this shoulder that I'm doing it right now as I walk in my kitchen, that moves incredibly well. You can swing it in a circle. You can raise it overhead. You can scratch your back with it. It's incredibly mobile. So the reason why I say that is because for a lot of people, and they're surprised by this, but for a lot of people, they have all the flexibility they need. It's not all that common that I get an archer that I assess and they've got a lot of tightness in their shoulder. When I worked with general population and other athletes more, it would be the case. But most people, not all, most people have all of the range of motion and flexibility that they need. So you're listening, you say, okay, great. What's that mean? That means that a little bit of stretching to maintain that is okay, or if it feels good, that's okay. But if I already have all of this range of motion in an already mobile joint, then I don't necessarily need to crank on it and just try to open up more range of motion to do what with, right? So for a big chunk of people that, again, have all the range of motion they need, I'm more concerned about stabilizing that shoulder, which means bracing it, getting it strong and solid in all of those ranges of motion. I'm more concerned about stabilizing the shoulder and then using that range of motion. For instance, if somebody has all the flexibility they need, then I want them doing good quality pressing variations, pressing overhead, and using that range of motion and getting strong with that range of motion. I don't want to see that person crank on that shoulder and just try to stretch it even more, because again, there's no need. It's not going to provide any value if it's already there.
Right.
So with that big group of people, not much or much at all. I'm one of those people, and as far as my shoulder specific work, maybe 5% of it is stretching. But for the other kind of category of people who, okay, we assess the shoulder and we find out that it's tight, and more specifically in what ranges of motion or what positions is it tight, then yes, we'll use a little bit of stretching, because we do want range of motion in that shoulder. However, in a shoulder that is tight, there's often a reason that it's tight. And what I mean by that is, like we said, by nature, that ball in the socket, that joint, that shoulder joint, is very mobile based on its structure. So for it to become tight, there's typically a reason for that. Often that reason is because it's unstable in certain positions or movement.
It's compensating for lack of in another area.
Exactly. Because in certain ranges, it doesn't feel braced and stable and protected. It will tighten itself. So yes, we can still use a little bit of stretching there, but we still need to look at getting that shoulder stronger and getting it to use its range of motion and stabilize that shoulder in addition to stretching. So, hopefully that hits home, because, you know, I'll have people ask me all the time, you know, what stretches should I do? What stretches should I do? What are some good stretches? And I know they're kind of just asking a general question of what stuff should I do, but it's just kind of, you know, a lot of people do go to the idea of stretching. Oh, my shoulder hurts, I need to stretch. Shoulder hurts, I need to stretch. And the majority of the people that I'm working with, the majority of work that they're doing is not stretching, and it is effective. And of course is dependent on the individual. And the last thing I'll say too, is that I know that, you know, we're not just totally focused on archery and not concerned about anything else in life, but when we're thinking about archery too, if we look at archery in and of itself, the flexibility demands are not that high. It's not a gymnast who's swinging on rings. It's not an Olympic weightlifter who's putting a barbell overhead. We need to see some movement and rotation from particularly the draw shoulder and a little bit of movement in the bow shoulder. But by and large, the shoulders are under demands related to force and tension and load, which is all a matter of strength and stability. They're not so much under demands of being highly stretched or pushed into excessive ranges of motion.
Right.
So
that totally makes
a good question.
No, that totally makes sense. I mean, as you were talking, like I'm thinking, like it's not a hamstring. You know what I mean? That needs that flexibility, or it could pop if you overexert it. You know what I mean? It's like, so it's not that type of muscle group where it plays a different role. You know, for me, you know, just in the interest of just overall health to a degree, I work yoga into my routine just as a normal
and not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing at all. It's just one of those things that I, you know, work into it as part of my usual routine, and it's not any more than probably like twice a week. And it's just because I get other benefits of it outside of like archery. You know, there's other benefits that I'm getting from it. So that's why it kind of stays.
Yeah, and what I want to clarify there is, I guess when you were asking in reference to stretching, I was referring to the shoulders and what we're looking at for the shoulders.
Totally.
As far as the rest of the body, absolutely. There's stretching again has its time and place and role there. More so for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I totally I'm glad you clarified, because I was totally picking up that you were talking about the shoulder specifically for archery purposes, but good to clarify that we're not dissing stretching.
No,
Um,
it's stretching. Stretching is a tool, right?
yeah.
And tools are best used in the right time and place. And for the shoulders, it's a tool that I find myself using less and less often. But certainly for other components of the body, yeah, that's going to be a helpful component more often.
Right. So now I want to move into injury related things now at this point, and I guess we'll just use me as a guinea pig here, just because it's what I'm familiar with, and get a sense of, how you would break down what may be causing it. And I know it's hard to do because we're just doing this kind of on the fly. And so I guess maybe the easiest way to do it is to just give you the case study of my injury, and then just want to hear you just kind of go through and break down, like, this is kind of like what you're hearing the causes. And then, and I don't need specific workouts or whatever, just like, what are some muscles or things to consider that would be helpful from a rehab process standpoint. So we just kind of get a glimpse of like the programmatic approach that you have to kind of assessing these things, and then being able to put together a plan for like ultimately how you help someone get back on the right side of the bow, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Cool.
Sure. Yeah.
So climbing a stick, and I don't even know if I've told this on this podcast, but I was about 6 foot up, slipped off a stick. I used Climbinators. It was a wet morning, and the tree was a little bit damp, and I had my toe dug in and it slipped. So as I fell, to keep myself from hitting the ground and smacking my head off the ground or whatever, having my foot still stuck in a stirrup, I, with my left hand, grabbed the top step of my stick, and it swung me around the tree. So I overextended my shoulder as it kind of like wrapped me around, right? Hurt for a moment. I got up, or got myself back onto the ground, and I finished climbing, set up, and hunted that morning, then got down and went home. And it didn't really bother me until like a day later. I was just sore. You know what I mean? I was like, that's weird. Why am I'm a little bit sore? And I realized I fell. So I was like, I fell out of the tree. So, a little beat up from that. So no big deal.
Sure.
It lingered on. I kept shooting. It didn't really bother me, too bad. It's like, it was something that was there when I was drawing. Now, this was my left arm, right? So that's my bow arm. Shooting, as time goes by. It feels like it's getting a little bit worse, but it's not crazy terrible. Now, mind you, this is the same shoulder that I've probably dislocated like 3 different times. And I'm getting ready to leave for my rut trip in Missouri, and I wake up like a week before I'm supposed to leave, and for whatever reason, like, it just was like on fire that day. And then it had been like that basically since before I left, and got to the point to where it's like, even putting pressure on, like putting my forearm on a table and like lifting myself off the table, to get up from something or whatever, like, hurt to the point of like, significant discomfort. Now, I went on the hunting trip, could pull back my bow, didn't really shoot while I was on the trip, came back, and just even pulling the bow back hurt. Right. Finally went and, started seeing someone to try to figure it out. And the pain was basically like right at like I guess it's maybe a bursa sac that's right at the front of the shoulder, I think is what I've kind of like narrowed it down to a degree. But then I have like these shooting pains that are kind of like down my tricep, into my elbow. And then on the front end of my bicep, like right around where the bicep tendon would be. Right. And so I've done tons of chiropractic adjustments and stuff like that. Those have seemed to help. And I have, seen like a therapist guy that's been kind of helping me with like certain exercises and stuff like that to kind of try to strengthen things and work my way through it. Funny thing is when I work out and actually use it, it feels way better than whenever I keep it immobile. So with that, I know that's like a quick, like Cliff Notes version of like what I have going on, but just, I want to give people an appreciation for just kind of how, and feel free to ask me questions, because we'll use this as a case study so people kind of understand like how this works.
Yeah, sure. So you gave me some good background information there. You're describing what had happened, what you had felt up until that point, what has been helpful, what has not been helpful. The first thing that jumps out at us is that you had what's called an acute injury, and that means acute injuries are along the lines of falling off of a stick, car crash, slipping on ice, picking up a baseball that rolled over to you at a picnic and throwing it once and hurting your shoulder, stuff like that happens one time. It's a specific event, opposed to the opposite would be something that's more chronic, and that's hey, I've been shooting my bow for the past couple of months and slowly started to feel some pain coming on, or, hey, I started rock climbing and my elbows have started to bother me over time, stuff like that. That's more gradual.
Right.
Knowing that it's an acute issue, that's one of the big things there. Also knowing that it sounds like I'd have to maybe have you show me if we were on a video call or describe it again, but it sounds like you got pushed into a pretty excessive range of motion.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we know that the injury was, maybe a little bit based on load, but more so based on getting pushed into an extreme position. Whereas, a load-based injury would be something like, I was bench pressing and just going for a 1-rep max and, went bad, something like that, where it's just based on load.
Right.
Yours wasn't so much. It was based on getting pushed into that excessive range. And the reason why that's important is knowing that I am going to shy. I would say first that I'm going to look at what ranges of motion are uncomfortable for you, what ranges of motion don't feel good or maybe are limited, what ranges of motion do feel okay and do feel strong. And then we're going to play the game with trying to find what positions do we want to try to stabilize that shoulder to get it to calm down and begin to accept movement, accept load again, right? Because you were pushed into an excessive range of motion, and I'm not going to necessarily want to just start cranking on it more, right? If
Right.
the place you got hurt in was being stretched, I don't want to take you back to that place in which you got hurt in, which is stretching more. I'm going to look more towards how can we strengthen that shoulder, stabilize it, get it to do all the things that often happen when we strengthen and stabilize the shoulder. And that can often get the shoulder to calm down. It can get the tissues to calm down. It can decrease your perception of pain or how you feel that pain, decrease the sensitivity to that pain as that shoulder starts to feel load again and good loading. It starts to accept it more. Then we can start to get into a little bit more movement, which will allow us to get that shoulder moving under some load, but not necessarily, just cranking on it and stretching it. So we're thinking about using that shoulder and taking the clues as we go along. What are you doing well with? What are you not doing well with? And continue to build in that process. Now, what is difficult, and I'm sure that you've thought about it up to this point, is in the instance of an acute injury like that, there is a possibility for some damage to an actual structure where when you have an acute episode like that, where it's like bang right here, we stress or strain something, there can potentially be some damage to a structure. Now, in that case, that's something that then goes beyond me. That is something that I don't diagnose. I don't work with something that's going to be related to actual physical damage. So that's something that would have to be looked at and evaluated and determined by either an orthopedic surgeon or someone else in that realm, to move forward with that. So.
Right. Nice. Yeah. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head with all the stuff that I've been kind of going through. So it's not been a lot of stretching. It's been a lot of, whenever I've been working with the physical therapist fellow that I've been doing some stuff with, it's been a little bit of mobility stuff, right? So to, like almost like range of motion, because it's getting stiff and not wanting to move as it should. So like kind of think what you were kind of talking about before. It's like, I'm not trying to increase the mobility of the joint per se. I'm just trying to get it to do what it's supposed to do, because it wasn't doing that without pain, right? So they've been kind of working with me on that, and then doing a lot of what you had talked about previously, which was starting to balance out the muscles. That way they can get to a point of understanding, is the shoulder willing to take pressure and load whenever it starts to strengthen itself? Do the issues still manifest? You know what I mean? Because if so, then we might have to start talking about, well, what are some of the other possibilities that could be happening? Right. And so that's kind of where I'm at in the path of healing at the moment. So you are your prognosis or your ability to kind of visualize what I got going on via a phone conversation was pretty accurate, man. So so kudos on that.
Well, cool. That's a good thing. Yeah, and that just speaks to that. It sounds like you're working with some good people that are doing some things along the right line, which is great. So I'm glad to hear that you've gotten some good help so far.
Awesome. So there's one last area. If you have some time left, man, I don't want to keep you. Do you have a few minutes?
No,
though?
I'm good.
Okay, cool.
I'm good.
There's one other area that I wanted to talk about a little bit because we've kind of gone through probably, I'm guessing you probably see a lot of folks for they're having an issue with something and they're trying to get something corrected or whatever the case is. But then there's the other aspect of just overall improving your performance, right? And I think sometimes, people don't necessarily think about weight training or whatever the case is from an archery perspective in terms of impact of performance, and also even impact of hunting, hunting in general, like your ability to move effectively through terrain. And then the ultimate aspect of it of being able to pull off the shot when you need to pull off the shot and that your performance is capable to handle the situation. So, how do we come back from an injury or whatever the case is? How do we retain what we have and just continue to improve our performance?
Now, when you say retain what we have, can you
so
be
say,
more specific? I just want to make sure that.
Sure. So you got, say we were working together and you got me back to homeostasis, right? You got me back to where I should be as though an injury never existed. We're back to par, back to baseline, right? How do you work with someone just to kind of keep them there, obviously preventing injuries, but more specifically, like I'm good on the, like, not getting injured front anymore. I'm not falling out of trees anymore. I'm strengthening all the right things, right? And making sure I'm balanced and things like that. Now I'm really coming to you and saying, hey, I feel great. I just want to up my game in terms of archery. I want to shoot more consistently. I want to shoot more accurately. How do I achieve those things?
Sure. So, I think with something like that, it's not a single path. I think there's definitely multiple components, and I'll try to touch on those equally. The first one, well, let's get the kind of side ones off. Certainly, as far as shooting effectively, shooting consistently, shooting accurately, we know that there's a large mental component of that, and that's a big component in archery, and it's an important one. There's some good information out there. I know that a lot of people are very fond of Joel Turner and what he does with shot IQ. So I know he has some good information in relation to that. I have not gone through any of his things, but I've seen a little bit of his information. And I do.
He talks a lot about closed loop versus open loop shooting, right? That's the fellow. Is that the? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I haven't, like I said, gone through any of his stuff, but just some of the general concepts are that I've taken just from a little bit of what I've seen are things that are kind of obvious, but just really need to be hammered home and just be prioritized. Really is the best way to put it. And that's just things like determination, control, and focus. I was out shooting today in my barn, and I catch myself just starting to kind of fling arrows, and I say, okay, let's bring it back down to earth. Let's really focus on your shot process, and let's really focus on this and be determined with the shot. So just some simple reminders like that are going to put you in that mindset to practice to the best of your ability mentally. Then you have the equipment side of things, and I'll be the first one to tell you, Clint, that I am not the guy to talk to when it comes to equipment. I have pretty much my whole archery career gone to Bucks and Bows, and Gibsonia, PA, and Rick and Tony have taken care of me tremendously. So I basically do whatever they tell me to do as far as equipment goes, and then as far as recurve stuff goes, Tom Klum from Rocky Mountain Gear has given me some good guidance there. So obviously there's a whole lot of equipment side of things. Guys will get into arrows and FOC and all kinds of different stuff. I'm not the guy to talk to for that, but we know that that's an important component. I don't believe that equipment makes you a good shooter by any means, but I do believe it helps. It's right. It's a tool. It's part of the equation. And it may not be the most important part of the equation, but it's part of the equation. And then we get to the physical side of things, the archery side of things, the or I should say, physical and mechanical and technique side of things. And that's, where I would say that's the category I fit into. And, there's no, in all the different parts of that, technique, making sure the body is physically equipped to shoot the bow, and shoot and practicing. There's no substitute for shooting. So, as simple as it sounds, you got to put as many arrows through that bow as time and as your body and your mind allows.
Right.
That there's no substitute for repetition. Now, where what I do, where this comes in is kind of like you were saying, right? Okay, I don't have pain, so I'm not worried about that. My shoulders are in good condition; they feel good. I don't have any issues, so I'm not worried about that. We get to this third component that I work with more so with target archers because they're the ones that are more focused on this. But it's a performance approach to archery. Just like, if we look at baseball players or golfers, they're doing things outside of their sport to maximize what their bodies can do in the sport. And
Right.
again, I do this mostly with target archers, but it applies to any archers if it's something they're interested in. And that's the idea of making sure that the body is as equipped as possible to shoot that bow as well as possible. And what I mean by that, we're thinking about primarily the stability and stamina of that body. We know through the research and the literature that fatigue diminishes performance in sport, particularly with control in a sport. So when you talk about something like drawing and stabilizing and steadying and executing a shot, any amount of fatigue that is built up is going to diminish that. We also talk about things like, on top of stamina, being stable in the sense where you'll hear from certain guys where they say like, man, my pin is just floating all over the place. And like, I feel so unsteady. Well, that comes down to the nervous system and muscular control throughout that whole system. Now, there is a mental component there, but as far as the stability component, your nervous system has to be accurate and precise in the way that it controls your muscles, which hold your bones and your body and everything in a continual state of tension and in a constant point of tension so that you can feel solid, you can feel stable, and then you can execute consistently. So recapping all of that, there's certainly a mental component to shooting well. There's some good resources out there. There is the equipment side of things, obviously, that a lot of guys will talk about. There is the technique in shooting and form components that there's a lot of good information out. There's archery coaches out there that are obviously very good. And then there's the physical side of things. And certainly a complex topic, but the part I focus on is for those people that shoot a lot and really want to gain that last few percent. We're looking at making sure that we can maximize what the body does from a stability and stamina point to be able to shoot the same way on the first arrow to the 100th arrow,
Right.
and everything in between.
Right. I mean, it makes sense, man. It's, I'll kind of start to wrap this up just like we kind of started it, which is, when we talked about that adaptability and, and that, it's almost, there's a strategy involved and there's these puzzle pieces. It's like archery and shooting. The body's very much the same way, right? It's a puzzle piece. It's adaptable, it's pliable, and it will, form to whatever pressures you apply. If we kind of then flip it to the idea of archery, right? There's a lot of components that go into it. It's no different than the components that go into trying to kill a big deer, that you have all these pieces that you need to try to fit together. It's the same thing when it comes down to the actual execution of shooting. Like you mentioned, there's a multitude of things that are considered. They all play a role in that. And I would say, for me at least, and you might have read or seen literature that says differently, but for my mind and my money, all the other things, being equal, the physical component of it, being able to control things physically. And then when we start talking about it physically, it's like, if if I'm confident that I am in as good a shape as I can be in to execute the shot, all of a sudden the mental aspect of it becomes clearer and cleaner.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm now confident that physically I'm going to be able to pull off what I can pull off. So now all of a sudden my nervous system is in alignment with where I would like to be, which now all of a sudden I'm able to control my muscular system and my skeletal system better to help me confidently hold that pin where I want to hold it, knowing that I can execute the shot. Right. And you don't have to be a championship target archer to feel that. You just have to be in a tree when your target buck walks up and feel buck fever and wonder how you're ever going to execute a shot if he gets close enough because you're losing your marbles. That's when all that stuff kind of comes to play, right? It's like you now have the confidence because all the things are in alignment. I can pull this shot off because that buck fever is resembles or mimics that fatigue factor in sport. Your knees get weak, your breath, your heart rate increases, and you still have to figure out how to sink that 12-foot putt, or you have to figure out how to hit that free throw, with no time on the clock, or throw that touchdown pass as time is expiring in the fourth quarter, or execute that archery shot to get the mount on the wall that you've been wanting to put on the wall. All are relatable, all are the same, and come down to that physical component and confidence, which then clears out the mental aspect for you to be able to execute the things you're trying to execute. So that's kind of how I look at it, man. So I view.
Yeah, I love it.
I view the health aspect of it and the physical aspect of it, in my mind, is probably more important than anything. Because, when you're hunting, I can will myself to go further, go longer, go harder if my body will allow me to. And a lot of times I'll find success. Just going back to the wrestling story, I wasn't the best and I wasn't the most technically sound, but I had the confidence that I could will my body to outperform the competitors. And I feel somewhat the same way in bow hunting, that, look, I may not be the best hunter on the planet. I may not have all those strategic answers and stuff like that. But what I do know is that physically I can probably go further and go longer and go harder than a lot of people. And that's the reason why I'll find success in certain areas, is because I would just be able to will my body to do more than the next person, and if that's the way you have to win, then so be it.
Yeah. So 100%. I think it's very well said.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on here, man. Before I let you go, I don't want to eat up any more of your time, but before I let you get running, if you wouldn't mind, let people know where they can find out more about you, where they can find out more about Archery Strong, and where they can find and follow along with your content.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Primarily, the primary place that I'm putting out content right now is Instagram. I'm at archery.strong. So it's archery and then a period and then strong. When time allows, I want to try to reach more people and put out more content on YouTube, so people can take a look at that or keep a lookout for that. And then the website is www.archery-strong.com. So it's archery, then a small dash, strong.com. There's a lot of information about what we do, how we do it, training options, place to contact me. I always tell people that please feel free to reach out either through the website or on Instagram through a message or my email. I'm happy to hear from people, even just to talk through questions, or if people have curiosities or whatever it may be. No strings attached. I just like hearing from people and seeing if I can help. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
Me.
So yeah, guys out there, if you're dealing with an injury or don't want to deal with an injury, or you want to just get better at shooting, get a hold of Chris. He's got some great content on his website. A lot of cool products to get involved with, and that are able to help facilitate, achieving your goals. So I'd urge you to check out the content, check out his website, and if there's a program in there that feels right for you to get you to where you want to be, I would not hesitate in hitting Chris up and having a conversation with him and figuring out what may be right for you to meet your goals. So appreciate you coming on, brother, and have a good rest of the year, rest of the winter. I hope you get dug out soon.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. Thanks for the great conversation. I appreciate what you're doing, and keep up the good work.
All right. Sounds good, man. I'll talk to you soon. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you'd be able to do those two things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.